one belonged. But 7 years ago, on Thanksgiving, I found out exactly where my place in that circle was: outside, on the cold concrete of her front porch. While the dining table inside was perfectly set for 8 people, gleaming silverware, crystal glasses, and the warm aroma of roasted turkey, my dinner was waiting for me on a flimsy paper plate by the doormat. A sticky note from my mom read, "You aren't clean enough to sit with us. Eat here or go." I didn't shed a single tear. I just took the plate, walked to my car, and drove out of their lives completely. For 7 years, they thought they had successfully discarded me. They thought I was broken. But yesterday, my sister tracked me down at my new address. What she saw made her hand shake so violently she dropped her phone. Then the calls started. 89 missed calls in just 1 hour. My name is Clara, and I am 34 years old. If you looked at my life today, you would see a woman who stands firmly on her own 2 feet, but it took a long, painful journey to get here. 7 years ago, my world looked completely different. It was Thanksgiving evening, and the crisp autumn air was biting, but the coldness outside was nothing compared to what was waiting for me at my childhood home. Growing up, I was always the defined black sheep of the family. My sister Chloe was the golden child, destined for elite universities and corporate boardrooms. I, on the other hand, preferred the raw, honest work of my hands, eventually becoming an apprentice welder and mechanic. My family viewed my grease-stained overalls as a badge of shame. That Thanksgiving, I arrived a few minutes late, straight from a grueling shift at the shop. As I walked up the driveway, I could see the dining room window. The table inside was artfully set for 8 people, expensive linen, sparkling crystal glasses, and a magnificent roasted turkey sitting right in the center. My mother and siblings were already inside, laughing and sharing toasts. But when I reached the front door, I froze. There was no spot for me inside. Instead, resting right on the concrete porch by the doormat, was a flimsy paper plate piled with cold leftovers. Tucked underneath a fork was a bright neon sticky note in my mother's unmistakable handwriting. "You aren't clean enough to sit with us. Eat here or go." The cold grease from that paper plate stained my fingers, but the realization of what my family had done stained my soul. I didn't knock on the door, and I didn't make a scene. I simply walked back to my beat-up car, threw the plate in the trash, and drove out of their lives completely. That night, I made a silent vow that they would never have the opportunity to look down on me again. The next morning, I took radical steps to erase myself from their world. I changed my phone number, deleted my old social media accounts, and packed everything I owned into the back of my car. I moved 3 states away, to a city where nobody knew my name or my family's suffocating expectations. The first few years were incredibly grueling. I worked 80-hour weeks in a dark, drafty commercial garage, my muscles aching and my hands covered in fresh cuts and burns every single day. I lived on instant noodles and slept on a mattress on the floor of a tiny studio apartment. I didn't receive a single dime of family support, nor did I want it. I was rebuilding my life from absolute scratch, fueled entirely by the quiet determination to prove them wrong. Before I tell you what my sister found when she finally tracked the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my journey has reached. Because while my family assumed I was broken and destitute, I was quietly building something massive. 7 years of silence can change a person, hardening your resolve while softening the sharp edges of past grief. I had finally found my peace, surrounded by the heavy scent of motor oil and the satisfying hum of industrial machinery. It was a crisp Tuesday afternoon, and I was deeply engrossed in fabricating a custom chassis for a high-end client when a sudden shadow fell across the wide entrance of my open driveway. I wiped the sweat from my brow, pulled off my heavy welding mask, and squinted into the bright sunlight. Standing there, looking incredibly out of place against the backdrop of industrial steel, was my sister, Chloe. The 7 years had changed her, too. The effortless, polished confidence of the golden child was completely missing. Her expensive clothes looked rumpled, her face was drawn with exhaustion, and her hands trembled slightly as she clutched a thick, worn manila folder tightly against her chest. She stared at me, her eyes wide with absolute shock as she took in my grease-stained overalls and the heavy tools scattered around me. She clearly hadn't expected to find me working in a place like this. Before I could even speak, Chloe took a desperate step forward. She explained that she had spent weeks tracking me down because our family was in the middle of a catastrophic crisis. The family business was collapsing under a mountain of hidden debt. Their mother was facing total financial ruin, and they were completely desperate to find a major private investor to buy them out. Chloe stood there, her eyes darting around the expansive, state-of-the-art facility. She looked right through me, completely unaware of the reality of the situation. I was told the principal investor of Apex Custom Design lives and works on this estate, she said, her voice tight with urgency. I need to see him immediately, Clara. Our family's entire future depends on this meeting, and I don't have time to waste. I looked down at the grease on my hands, then back up at my sister. The sheer irony of the moment washed over me. Follow me, I said calmly. I tossed my heavy wrench onto a nearby tool cart and led her out of the bustling garage bay, walking across the immaculate courtyard toward the architectural glass front office building that anchored the commercial estate. Chloe followed closely behind, clutching her folder like a shield, still assuming I was merely a low-level mechanic or perhaps a tenant renting a back corner of the property. I pulled open the heavy glass doors, walked past the front reception desk, and stepped directly into the spacious executive office. Without hesitation, I walked around the massive mahogany desk and sat down comfortably in the high-backed executive leather chair. Chloe froze in the center of the room, her jaw dropping as she watched me. Sit down, Chloe, I said, leaning forward and resting my elbows on the clean desk. You said you came here looking for the owner and the principal investor who holds the power to buy out the family's debts. You're looking at her. I own this entire estate. Chloe stood completely frozen in the center of the office, the thick manila folder slipping from her hands and scattering papers across the floor. She stared at me, then down at the official business registration document she had brought, finally connecting the name of the multi-million-dollar corporate investor to the sister she had once cast out. In a state of absolute panic and disbelief, she snatched her phone from her pocket. Without saying a word, she raised it, took a crystal-clear picture of me sitting behind the executive desk, and uploaded it directly into our old family group chat. Beneath the image, her trembling fingers typed a single sentence. You need to see this right now. I watched the phone on my desk. The group chat, which had been active with panicked family updates all morning, went completely, devastatingly silent. For 2 full minutes, nobody typed a word. The shock waves were rippling 3 states away. Then, the explosion began. My old number was still blocked, but Chloe's phone began to vibrate violently against her palm. It didn't just ring. It screamed with incoming notifications. Within the span of a single hour, 89 missed calls and hundreds of frantic messages poured in from our mother, our brother, and every extended relative who had turned a blind eye 7 years ago. Chloe, her face entirely devoid of color, answered the incoming line and shakily hit the speakerphone button. Instantly, our mother's voice filled the executive office, completely stripped of its old disgust, now dripping with a desperate, synthetic flattery. Clara, darling, is that really you? My mother's voice pleaded through the speakerphone, trembling with a sudden, carefully calculated warmth. Chloe just sent the photo. We are all completely overjoyed to see how wonderfully you've done for yourself. In fact, we were just talking about you. The holidays are coming up, and I've already set the main dining table. There is a beautiful place reserved just for you right at the center, exactly where you belong. Please, you must come home early this year, so we can celebrate as a family. I listened to her voice, feeling absolutely nothing. The emotional power she once held over me had vanished the moment that paper plate hit the porch floor. The table is set for me, Mother? I asked, my voice chillingly calm and steady. That's funny, because 7 years ago, you explicitly wrote that I wasn't clean enough to sit at your table. You told me to eat on the concrete porch by the doormat or leave. I chose to leave. A heavy, suffocating silence filled the line before she began to stammer, making desperate excuses about the stress of that night. I cut her off instantly. I am not coming home, and I am not giving you a single dime to save your failing company, I stated firmly. But I will offer you one legal alternative. My firm will buy out the family home directly from the bank to clear your personal debt. However, the deed transfers to me immediately. You will have exactly 30 days to pack your bags and find somewhere else to live. 3 months later, the dust had finally settled and the papers were signed. True to my word, I bought the family home, clearing their debt, and my mother moved into a modest apartment that she could actually afford. I sold the remaining family assets that Chloe and our brother could manage, and I used the proceeds to further expand my business. I moved into a beautiful, quiet cottage overlooking the valley, a peaceful sanctuary where the air is clean and the only noise is the rustle of the wind. For the first time in my adult life, I am living entirely on my own terms, accountable to absolutely no one but myself. But I didn't want my success to just be about profit. Remembering the young woman who once stood on a cold porch holding a paper plate, I established a dedicated foundation. We fund trade school scholarships and provide tools for young women entering blue-collar fields, ensuring that anyone who has ever been told they weren't clean enough for success has a chance to build their own empire. What would you have done if you found that paper plate on the porch all those years ago? Would you have saved your family when they came begging, or would you have walked away just like I did? And they will definitely surprise you. Thank you.